The thunderstorm hit Nashville without warning as Wilson Wild raced toward the job interview that could save his family from eviction. That's when he saw her, a woman in expensive clothes, struggling with a flat tire on the side of the highway. Rain soaking through her designer suit. Wilson had 15 minutes to get to the interview. 15 minutes to land the mechanic supervisor position that would change everything for him and his young daughter. But he stopped anyway. What Wilson didn't know was that the stranded woman was Amelia Ross, the secret heiress to the Michelin Tire empire. Company built on a foundation of lies that had destroyed Wilson's father decades earlier. She was hiding from her own family, running from a truth that could topple the world's largest tire manufacturer. One act of kindness in the rain was about to expose a conspiracy 20 years in the making, and prove that sometimes helping a stranger can quite literally change the world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The interstate turned into a river as Wilson Wild's 15-year-old pickup truck struggled through the worst storm Nashville had seen all year. His one good interview suit hung in the back seat, still damp from the last time he'd worn it 3 weeks ago to another dead-end meeting. The radio crackled with weather warnings, but Wilson couldn't turn back now. 15 minutes. That's all he had to make it to Precision Motors on the other side of town for the mechanic supervisor interview that could change everything. The position paid $47,000 a year plus benefits enough to finally move 8-year-old Emma out of their cramped one-bedroom apartment above Sal's diner, where the smell of grease seeped through the floorboards and the neighbors upstairs fought until 3 in the morning. Wilson's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as he thought about the eviction notice folded in his wallet. 30 days to come up with 2 months back rent, or he and Emma would be sleeping in the truck. Again, the windshield wipers battled uselessly against the downpour as Wilson navigated through the industrial district. That's when he saw the black sedan pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly through the sheets of rain. A woman in what looked like an expensive gray suit stood beside the car, her blonde hair plastered to her head as she stared helplessly at a completely flat rear tire. Wilson's foot moved toward the brake pedal, then hesitated. 30 minutes. Now, he could see other cars slowing down. Someone else would stop. Someone who didn't have everything riding on being exactly on time to an interview with a shop foreman known for refusing to reschedule meetings. But as Wilson watched in his rearview mirror, car after car simply switched lanes and kept driving. The woman looked around desperately, her white blouse now transparent from the rain, her expensive heels slipping on the wet asphalt as she tried to figure out how to even access the spare tire. Wilson knew what his father would have done. Hell, he knew what any decent person would do. But decent people didn't have 8-year-old daughters depending on them for everything. Decent people didn't have final notices from the electric company stuffed in their kitchen drawers. He pulled over anyway. Wilson parked his truck behind the sedan and grabbed his rain jacket from the passenger seat. The storm hit him like a wall of ice water the moment he stepped outside, instantly soaking through his interview clothes. The woman looked up at him with a mixture of relief and embarrassment as he approached. "Car trouble?" Wilson called over, the sound of rain hammering the pavement. "The tire just went flat," she said, having to raise her voice to be heard. "I don't really know how to. I've never actually changed one before." Wilson glanced at his watch. 11 minutes. If he helped her quickly, maybe he could still make it. Maybe. "Let me take a look," he said, kneeling beside the car to examine the damage. The tire was completely shredded, probably hit a piece of road debris during the storm. "You got a spare in the trunk?" "I think so." The uncertainty in her voice told Wilson everything he needed to know about how this was going to go. He popped the trunk and found the spare tire buried under golf clubs and shopping bags that probably cost more than Wilson made in a month. The jack was there, but it was one of those compact emergency ones that would take twice as long to use properly. 8 minutes now. Wilson's phone buzzed with a text from the shop foreman. "Running on time? We've got 3 other candidates today." Wilson stared at the message, then at the woman who was now shivering visibly in the cold rain. She had pulled out her phone and was frantically scrolling through contacts, probably looking for someone to call for help. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the device. "Look," Wilson said, making a decision that he knew would cost him everything. "This is going to take about 20 minutes to do right. You want to wait in my truck where it's warm?" "You don't have to," she started. "Yes, I do," Wilson said simply, already pulling the spare tire from the trunk. "Nobody should be stuck out here in this weather." As he set up the jack, Wilson felt his phone buzzing again. Probably the shop foreman wondering where he was. Wilson didn't check it. Some things were more important than money, his father had always said. Even when they'd lost everything, his father had never lost sight of that. The lug nuts were rusted and difficult to remove in the rain. Wilson's cheap tools slipped twice, scraping skin off his knuckles. His interview clothes were completely ruined now, dark stains spreading across the white shirt that Emma had helped him iron that morning. "You're going to be so handsome at your interview, Daddy," she'd said, standing on a kitchen chair to reach his collar with the iron. "They'll definitely give you the job." Wilson blinked rain out of his eyes and kept working. By the time he finished, 37 minutes had passed. The interview was over before it had begun. The woman Amelia, she'd told him when she insisted on at least knowing his name, stood in the rain beside him as he loaded the flat tire into her trunk. She kept trying to give him money, which Wilson politely refused. She asked for his business card, which made Wilson laugh because mechanics who lived above diners didn't have business cards. "How can I repay you?" she asked, and Wilson could tell she meant it. "Just pay it forward," Wilson said, wiping his hands on his ruined shirt. "Help somebody else when they need it." As Wilson drove away, his phone showed 6 missed calls from Precision Motors. He didn't call back. There was no point now. He'd blown his one real chance at stability, at giving Emma the life she deserved. But as he watched Amelia's sedan disappear safely into traffic in his rearview mirror, Wilson realized he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Proud of himself. His father would have been proud too. That had to count for something, even if it didn't pay the rent. Wilson Wilde had learned to fix engines before he could properly ride a bicycle, standing on milk crates in his father's garage while Robert Wilde explained the mysteries of combustion and compression to his wide-eyed son. Wilde's Automotive had been a fixture in the Hillsborough neighborhood for 23 years, the kind of place where customers became family, and Robert knew every car's history by heart. "An engine is like a promise," Robert would tell young Wilson, as they worked side by side. "You keep your word to the metal, and it'll keep its word to you." Robert Wilde was old school in the best way: honest pricing, quality work, and a reputation that brought customers from 3 counties away. The garage stayed busy enough to support a comfortable middle-class life. Wilson grew up in a 2-story house with a yard where he could practice basketball and a garage where he learned that work wasn't just about making money. It was about taking care of people. When Wilson graduated from Nashville Technical College with honors in automotive technology, the plan was simple: work alongside his father for a few years, learn the business side of things, then eventually take over Wilde's Automotive when Robert was ready to retire. Wilson had even sketched out plans for expanding the garage, adding a second bay, and maybe specializing in hybrid vehicle repair. Everything changed on a Tuesday in March when the lawyers arrived. Wilson was under the hood of Mrs. Patterson's Honda when Robert called him into the office. 3 men in identical dark suits sat around the desk that Robert had built himself from reclaimed barnwood. They had briefcases and clipboards and expressions that suggested this wasn't a social visit. "Wilson," Robert said, his voice strangely formal, "these gentlemen are from Michelin Corporation." They have some concerns about our business practices. The lead attorney, a thin man with steel-rimmed glasses, spread a collection of documents across the desk. Mr. Wilde, we have evidence that your establishment has been knowingly installing counterfeit Michelin tires and representing them as genuine products. Wilson felt the words like a physical blow. That's impossible. We only buy from certified distributors. We have all the paperwork. Paperwork that's been falsified, the attorney interrupted. We've traced 17 separate instances over the past 6 months where customers received counterfeit tires from this establishment. Tires that have since failed, causing significant property damage and, in one case, serious injury. Robert's face had gone pale. "Show me," he said quietly. The attorneys laid out photographs, invoices, technical reports. The evidence was overwhelming and seemingly ironclad. Wilde's Automotive had somehow become part of a counterfeit tire ring, selling fake Michelin products to unsuspecting customers, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Wilson stared at the paperwork, his mind racing. He remembered every tire installation from the past 6 months. The distributors they used had been certified for years. The paperwork had always checked out. But somehow, according to Michelin's investigation, they'd been selling fakes. "We're prepared to offer a settlement," the lead attorney said. "You close the business immediately, surrender your licenses, and agree never to work in automotive retail again. In exchange, we don't pursue criminal charges for fraud and trademark violation." "Criminal charges?" Wilson's voice cracked. "The alternative is a federal investigation, criminal prosecution, and civil suits from every customer who received counterfeit products. We're talking about potential prison time and financial liability that would exceed several $1,000,000. Robert, aged 10 years in that moment, Wilson watched his father's shoulders sag as the weight of the choice settled on him. Fight and risk losing everything, including their freedom, or surrender and lose everything anyway. "How long do we have to decide?" Robert asked. 24 hours, the attorney said, closing his briefcase. "And Mr. Wilde?" "We'll be monitoring to ensure no assets are moved or hidden. Everything is frozen as of now." That night, Wilson and Robert sat in the garage they built together, surrounded by the tools and memories of a lifetime. Robert's hands shook as he tried to explain how this could have happened, how their trusted suppliers could have betrayed them so completely. 23 years, Robert said, staring at the garage walls covered with customer photos and thank you notes. 23 years of honest work, and it's gone in one day. Wilson wanted to fight. He wanted to hire lawyers and demand investigations and prove their innocence. But when Robert showed him their bank statements and insurance policies, the reality became clear. They couldn't afford to fight a corporation the size of Michelin. The legal fees alone would bankrupt them long before they could prove anything. Robert signed the settlement agreement the next morning. The garage closed, permanently. The following week, Robert's reputation was destroyed. Customers who'd trusted him for decades now looked at him with suspicion and anger. The house was sold to pay legal fees and remaining debts. Robert moved to a small apartment across town and took a part-time job at a hardware store, his spirit completely broken. Wilson tried to find work at other shops, but word had spread. No established garage would hire someone connected to the Wilde's automotive scandal. He ended up taking whatever jobs he could find, oil changes at quick lube places, part-time work at used car lots, anything that would pay enough to help support his father and start building a life of his own. It was during this dark period that Wilson met Sarah Martinez at a community college automotive program where he was teaching night classes to make extra money. Sarah was retraining for a new career. After her divorce, determined to become financially independent. She was smart, kind, and had a laugh that could make Wilson forget about the unfairness of the world. They married 2 years later in a small ceremony at the courthouse. Sarah's daughter Emma, 4 years old then, had stood between them during the vows and announced that she wanted Wilson to be her real daddy. Wilson had cried right there in front of the judge. For 3 beautiful years, they built a life together. Sarah worked as a service advisor at a dealership while Wilson cobbled together income from various mechanic jobs. They rented a small house with a yard where Emma could play, and Wilson taught her the same lessons about engines and promises that his father had taught him. Robert's health declined rapidly after the garage closed. The stress and heartbreak had weakened something essential inside him. He died of a heart attack in his sleep 2 years after the settlement, never knowing that Wilson had been quietly investigating the counterfeit tire ring, never learning that the evidence against Wilds Automotive had been fabricated. Sarah's death came without warning on a Thursday evening. She'd been driving home from work when a drunk driver ran a red light. The accident happened less than a mile from their house. Wilson arrived at the hospital to find Sarah already gone, and Emma in the pediatric ward with a broken arm and trauma that would take years to heal. The insurance payout was enough to cover funeral expenses and Sarah's medical debts, but not much more. Wilson found himself suddenly alone with an 8-year-old who had nightmares every night and a mountain of grief. He didn't know how to climb that. The small house became too expensive without Sarah's income. Wilson and Emma moved to the 1-bedroom apartment above Sal's diner, where the rent was cheap and Sal occasionally let. Wilson fixed the kitchen equipment in exchange for free meals. Wilson worked 3 part-time jobs, now morning shifts at Jiffy Lube, afternoon freelance calls through an app-based service, and weekend work at a junkyard pulling parts. Emma spent after-school hours at the public library because Wilson couldn't afford childcare, doing homework at a corner table while the librarians kept an eye on her. Every night, Wilson tucked Emma into the pull-out couch that served as her bed and promised that things would get better. He'd find a real job soon. They'd get a real house again. Everything would be okay. But Wilson knew the truth that he couldn't tell an 8-year-old. The automotive industry was a small world, and the Wilds Automotive scandal followed him everywhere. No matter how skilled he was, no matter how desperately shops needed good mechanics, the moment his last name came up in background checks, the conversation ended. The eviction notice had arrived 3 days before the storm. 30 days to come. Up with $1,800 or Emma would be homeless. The Precision Motors interview had been Wilson's last real hope, a position with a company large enough that his father's reputation might not matter. As Wilson sat in his truck after helping Amelia, his soaked interview clothes clinging to his skin, he realized he'd just sacrificed his final chance at stability for a stranger who would forget his name by morning. But looking at his phone, seeing Emma's school photo as his wallpaper, Wilson knew he'd made the right choice. His father had always said that character was what you did when no one was watching, and nothing was at stake except your soul, even if it meant losing everything. Wilson was going to make sure Emma grew up knowing her father was a man who kept his promises to the world. Amelia Ross had been hiding in plain sight for 6 months, living under a carefully constructed identity that would have impressed the most paranoid witness protection specialist. The luxury downtown Nashville apartment was leased under the name Amy Richardson, paid for through a complex web of shell companies and cryptocurrency, transactions that even her family's best investigators hadn't been able to trace. She'd learned to dress down jeans instead of designer suits, drugstore makeup instead of professional styling, public transportation instead of private cars. The woman who had once commanded boardrooms now worked as a freelance marketing consultant, taking small-scale projects that paid just enough to maintain her cover without drawing attention. But 6 months of hiding couldn't erase 28 years of being Amelia Ross, sole heir to the Michelin tire and unwilling participant in the most successful corporate conspiracy in automotive history. Growing up as the granddaughter of Jean Paul Ross, the American CEO who had expanded Michelin's dominance in the United States market. Amelia had been groomed for corporate leadership from childhood. While other kids played with dolls, Amelia attended board meetings. While they learned about fairy tales, she memorized quarterly reports and market analyses. Jean-Paul had seen something special in Amelia, a sharp intelligence and natural charisma that reminded him of himself at her age. He'd begun training her as his successor when she was barely 12 years old, explaining market strategies over dinner and bringing her to tire plants during summer vacations. The tire business is about trust, Jean-Paul would tell her as they walked through manufacturing facilities. People put their families' lives in our hands every time they drive. We have a sacred responsibility to never betray that trust. Amelia had believed him completely. She'd graduated summa cum laude from Wharton with dual degrees in business and engineering, spent 2 years learning operations at Michelin facilities across Europe, and returned to Nashville ready to modernize the company her grandfather had built. At 25, she'd been named Vice President of Innovation, tasked with developing new tire technologies that would keep Michelin ahead of increasingly sophisticated competitors. Amelia had thrown herself into the work with passionate intensity, leading teams of engineers and researchers toward breakthroughs in safety, durability, and environmental sustainability. Her proudest achievement had been the Safeguard tire line revolutionary technology that could prevent blowouts even when the tire was severely damaged. The engineering was groundbreaking, using advanced polymer layers that could self-seal punctures and maintain structural integrity even under extreme stress. The Safeguard tires had been scheduled for a major market launch when Amelia discovered the files that changed everything. She'd been working late in her office, reviewing final production specifications, when she'd accidentally accessed a restricted server folder that should have been blocked from her clearance level. The folder contained 23 years of internal documents that painted a picture so horrifying that Amelia had initially assumed it was some kind of elaborate test or simulation. Michelin Corporation, under her grandfather's leadership, had been systematically destroying small tire retailers across the country through a sophisticated counterfeit operation. The company would identify successful independent dealers, then flood the market with perfect replicas of Michelin tires that were manufactured in substandard facilities overseas. The counterfeit tires looked identical to genuine Michelin products, same packaging, same serial numbers, same quality markings. But they were made with inferior materials and shortcuts that made them dangerous to use. When the fake tires inevitably failed, causing accidents and property damage, Michelin's legal team would swoop in with evidence of trademark violation and unauthorized distribution. The independent dealers, faced with massive lawsuits and criminal charges they couldn't afford to fight, would be forced to sign settlement agreements that destroyed their businesses and reputations. Michelin would then acquire their customer bases and physical locations at bargain prices, expanding their direct retail presence while eliminating competition. The scheme had generated over $2 billion in additional revenue while destroying hundreds of family businesses across the United States. Worse, the defective counterfeit tires had caused at least 47 serious accidents that Michelin knew about, including 12 fatalities. Amelia had spent 3 sleepless nights reading through the files, her horror growing with each document. Customer complaint letters that had been ignored, safety reports that had been buried, internal communications that treated human lives as acceptable losses in service of market expansion. The most damning evidence was a recorded conversation between Jean-Paul and the company's head of legal affairs, discussing a problematic tire dealer in Nashville, whose reputation was so solid that their usual tactics weren't working effectively. "The Wild Garage has been in business for 23 years, Jean-Paul's voice said on the recording. "Robert Wild is too well respected in the community. We need something more sophisticated this time." "What are you suggesting?" the lawyer's voice asked. Make it look like he's been selling our counterfeits unknowingly. Plant some evidence, create a paper trail. Then we come in as the victim seeking justice. Amelia had listened to that recording 17 times, each repetition confirming what she didn't want to believe. Her beloved grandfather was a criminal who had built his empire on the destruction of innocent families. When she'd confronted Jean-Paul with the evidence, he'd shown no remorse or surprise. They'd met in his private office, surrounded by awards and photos celebrating his decades of corporate leadership. "You were always too idealistic," Jean-Paul had said, pouring himself a whiskey as if they were discussing quarterly projections. "This is how business works at our level, Amelia. The strong survive, the weak are eliminated. That's not cruelty, that's evolution. You killed people," Amelia had said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those accidents, those families, collateral damage," Jean-Paul had interrupted. "Every major corporation has blood on its hands if you look close enough. The difference is that we have the courage to do what's necessary to protect our shareholders and employees." Amelia had threatened to expose everything, to take the evidence to federal authorities and media outlets. Jean-Paul had smiled indulgently, like she was a naive student who didn't understand the complexity of adult problems. "Who do you think will believe you?" he'd asked. "You're an emotionally unstable young woman making wild accusations against one of the most respected businessmen in America. I have senators on speed dial, federal judges who owe their careers to my political donations." He'd leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "Besides, you're forgetting something important. Your name is on half these documents. You've been involved in company operations for 3 years. Any investigation will conclude that you were either complicit or criminally incompetent." That night, Amelia had emptied her bank accounts, grabbed essential documents and personal items, and disappeared. She'd left behind a resignation letter that cited irreconcilable differences with company direction and provided no forwarding address. For 6 months, she'd been planning her next move. The evidence she'd stolen was hidden in 3 separate safety deposit boxes across the country, along with additional documentation she'd gathered about other victims of Michelin schemes. She'd been building cases, identifying journalists and prosecutors who might be trustworthy enough to handle the investigation properly. But Jean-Paul's reach was vast, and his threats weren't empty. 2 reporters who'd begun asking questions about Michelin's business practices had suddenly found themselves facing career-ending scandals. A federal prosecutor who'd opened a preliminary investigation had been transferred to Alaska after irregularities were discovered in previous cases. Amelia was running out of time and options. Jean-Paul's people were getting closer to finding her, and the longer she stayed hidden, the more difficult it became to maintain her cover. Worse, every day she delayed meant more independent dealers being destroyed and more families losing their livelihoods. The panic attack that had left her stranded on the interstate had been building for weeks. The stress of living in constant fear, combined with the weight of knowing she held evidence that could save lives but might cost her everything, had finally overwhelmed her carefully maintained composure. As she'd stood in the rain beside her disabled car, watching strangers drive past without stopping, Amelia had felt the crushing isolation of her situation. She was surrounded by people but completely alone, carrying secrets that could topple a corporation, but having no one she could trust with the truth. When Wilson had appeared like a guardian angel, sacrificing his own opportunities to help a stranger in distress, Amelia had felt something she hadn't experienced in months: faith in human goodness. His kindness had been so genuine, so unconditional, that it reminded her why the fight against Michelin's corruption was worth the risk. She didn't know yet that Wilson Wilde was the son of Robert Wilde, one of her grandfather's victims. She didn't know that the man who'd saved her was living in poverty because of her family's crimes. But she would learn soon enough, and when she did, the weight of that cosmic irony would either destroy her completely or give her the strength to finally do what was right. For now, though, she was just grateful to be safe and dry, with the memory of a kind stranger who'd reminded her that not everyone in the world was motivated by greed and power. That reminder would prove more important than either of them could imagine. 3 days after the storm, Amelia couldn't stop thinking about the mechanic who'd ruined his clothes and missed his interview to help a complete stranger. She'd given him her real business card in the moment, a mistake born from rattled nerves and genuine gratitude, but had been calling herself Amy Richardson for so long that the name Amelia Ross felt foreign on her tongue. She'd driven past the location where he'd helped her twice since then, hoping irrationally that she might see his beat-up pickup truck and have a chance to thank him properly. The guilt was eating at her. Wilson had sacrificed something important to help her, and she hadn't even offered adequate compensation. Her attempts to locate him through normal channels had failed. Directory assistants had no listing for Wilson Wilde, and her cautious internet searches hadn't turned up anything useful. She'd considered hiring a private investigator, but that would mean leaving a digital trail that might lead her grandfather's people directly to her. On Friday evening, desperation and impulse drove Amelia to the industrial district where she'd first encountered Wilson. She parked at a gas station and began systematically visiting every automotive shop in a 3-mile radius, hoping someone might recognize her description of the man who'd helped her. Jake's Auto Repair was her 7th stop, a cramped garage with 2 bays and a waiting area that smelled like motor oil and stale coffee. The owner, a grizzled man in his 60s with hands permanently stained black from decades of mechanical work, listened to her story with patient amusement. "You're looking for Wilson Wilde?" Jake asked when she finished describing the Good Samaritan. "Mechanic. Yeah, I know Wilson. Good kid, hell of a mechanic. His daddy Robert used to run Wilde's Automotive over in Hillsborough before." Jake's expression darkened. "Before what?" Amelia prompted. "Before Michelin Corporation destroyed him," Jake said bitterly. "Claimed Robert was selling counterfeit tires, sued him into the ground. Biggest load of bullshit I ever heard, Robert. Wilde was the most honest man in this business. But when you're fighting a company that size, truth doesn't matter much." Amelia felt ice water flood her veins. Wilde's Automotive? 23 years that man built that business. Helped half the neighborhood keep their cars running when they couldn't afford dealership prices. Then these corporate lawyers show up with some trumped-up charges and destroy everything he worked for. Jake spat into a nearby trash can. "Robert died 2 years later. Broken heart, his boy Wilson says." The room seemed to spin around Amelia. She gripped the edge of Jake's desk to keep from falling as the impossible coincidence struck her like a physical blow. Wilson Wilde, the son of Robert Wilde, the Nashville tire dealer her grandfather had specifically targeted for destruction. "Miss, you okay?" Jake was looking at her with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Amelia managed, though she was anything but fine. "Do you know where Wilson works now?" "Everywhere and nowhere," Jake said sadly. "Kid can't get steady work because of what happened to his father. Michelin made sure word got around that the Wilde name was poison in this industry. Last I heard, he was doing dig work through one of those app services, oil changes, minor repairs, whatever he can get." Jake pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "Here, I got his number. Wilson's good people, just caught up in something that wasn't his fault. If you're looking to hire him for some work, you'd be doing him a favor. He's got a little girl to support, and times are tough." Amelia stared at the phone number Jake had written on a sticky note, her mind reeling with the implications of what she'd just learned. The man who'd sacrificed his job interview to help her was living in poverty because her family had systematically destroyed his father's business and reputation. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. "Thank you," she said quietly, pocketing the note. "This is very helpful. You gonna call him?" Jake asked. Yes, Amelia said, though she had no idea what she would say. How do you apologize for your grandfather's crimes? How do you explain that the stranger who helped you is actually connected to your family through tragedy and injustice? That night, Amelia sat in her apartment for 3 hours, staring at Wilson's phone number and trying to find words for an impossible conversation. She started and deleted a dozen text messages, each attempt sounding more inadequate than the last. Finally, she settled on something simple. Hi Wilson, this is Amelia Ross from the tire incident on Tuesday. I'd like to properly thank you for your help. Could we meet for coffee? His response came 20 minutes later. Of course. Glad you're okay. When works for you? They arranged to meet Saturday morning at a small cafe near downtown Nashville. Amelia arrived 30 minutes early and claimed a corner table, where she could watch the entrance while remaining partially hidden. Her hands shook as she sipped coffee that tasted like sawdust, rehearsing explanations that all sounded like fiction. Wilson arrived exactly on time, wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt that had been carefully ironed. He looked around the cafe uncertainly until Amelia waved him over, offering a nervous smile that didn't quite mask her anxiety. You clean up nice, Wilson said as he sat down across from her, his own smile genuine and warm. Thanks for calling. I was wondering how you were doing after Tuesday. I'm fine, thanks to you, Amelia said. I wanted to apologize for not thanking you properly. You missed something important to help me, didn't you? Wilson's expression became carefully neutral. It was just a job interview. There'll be others. What kind of job? Amelia asked, though she already knew the answer would break her heart. Mechanic supervisor at Precision Motors. Good position, decent pay. Would have changed some things for me and my daughter. Wilson shrugged, but Amelia could see the disappointment he was trying to hide. But it's okay. Helping you is the right thing to do. Amelia's throat constricted. Tell me about your daughter. Wilson's entire demeanor transformed as he pulled out his phone to show pictures of a beautiful 8-year-old with serious dark eyes and a gap-toothed smile. This is Emma. She's in 3rd grade, wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up. Smart as a whip and twice as stubborn. She's beautiful, Amelia said, meaning it. It must be difficult raising her alone. We manage, Wilson said quietly. Her mom died 3 years ago, so it's just been us two ever since. Emma's the strongest person I know. The weight of what she knew pressed down on Amelia like a physical force. This man was struggling to raise his daughter in poverty because her grandfather had destroyed his family's business through calculated fraud, and he'd sacrificed his best chance at stability to help the granddaughter of the man who'd ruined his life. Wilson, Amelia said carefully, I need to tell you something about who I am. Before she could continue, Wilson's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. Everything okay? Amelia asked. It's Emma's school, Wilson said, already standing. She fell on the playground, and they think her arm might be broken. I have to go to the hospital. I'll drive you, Amelia said immediately. You don't have to. Yes, I do, Amelia said, echoing Wilson's words from Tuesday. Some things are more important than convenience. The drive to Vanderbilt Children's Hospital took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Wilson sat rigid in the passenger seat, his hands clenched in his lap as he stared out the window. Amelia drove in silence, knowing that nothing she could say would ease his worry dot at the hospital. They found Emma in the pediatric emergency room, her left arm in a temporary sling and her face streaked with tears. She looked so small and vulnerable in the oversized hospital bed that Amelia's heart clenched with protective instinct. Daddy, Emma called when she saw Wilson. I fell off the monkey bars and my arm really hurts. Wilson gathered his daughter into a careful hug, mindful of her injured arm. I know, sweetheart. The doctors are going to take good care of you. Emma noticed Amelia standing in the doorway. Who's the pretty lady? "This is Miss Amelia," Wilson said. "She's the one I helped with her car the other day." Emma studied Amelia with the frank curiosity of an 8-year-old. "You're the tire lady. Daddy said you were really nice and that helping people is always the right thing to do, even when it costs you something important." Amelia knelt beside Emma's bed, fighting back tears. "Your daddy is a very good man." "I know," Emma said matter-of-factly. "He takes care of everybody." Dr. Martinez, the pediatric orthopedist, arrived with X-ray results that showed a clean break. In Emma's radius, the bone would heal perfectly with a cast and 6 weeks of careful activity. The estimated cost, however, made Wilson's face go ashen. "We don't have insurance that covers this," Wilson said quietly to the doctor. "What are my options for payment plans?" While Wilson discussed financial arrangements that would stretch his already impossible budget to the breaking point, Amelia stepped into the hallway and made a phone call to her private banker. 5 minutes later, she returned to find Wilson arguing with the billing department about payment schedules. "Excuse me," Amelia said to the administrative staff. "I'll be handling Mr. Wilde's account. Please send all bills to this address." She handed them a business card for one of her shell companies. "You can't do that," Wilson protested. "It's already done," Amelia said firmly. "Emma needs that cast, and you need to focus on taking care of her, not worrying about money. I can't let you pay for this. I don't even know you." "You knew me well enough to help me in the rain," Amelia said. "And now I know you well enough to help your daughter." Emma, who had been listening to this exchange with fascination, spoke up from her hospital bed. "Daddy, if Miss Amelia wants to help, you should let her. You always tell me that accepting help isn't the same as giving up." Wilson looked between his daughter and the woman who was offering to save them from financial catastrophe, his expression a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Why?" he asked simply. Amelia met his eyes, knowing she was about to change both their lives forever. "Because 23 years ago, my family destroyed your father's business through fraud and lies. Because you're struggling to survive because of crimes my grandfather committed. And because the least I can do is make sure Emma gets the medical care she needs." The silence in the room was deafening. Wilson stared at her as the implications of her words sank in, his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and finally, a complex mixture of anger and confusion. "Ross," he said slowly. "Amelia Ross. You're Jean-Paul Ross's granddaughter." "Yes," Amelia said quietly. "And I have proof that everything done to your father was orchestrated by Michelin Corporation. I have evidence that could destroy my grandfather and the company he built." Wilson slumped into a chair beside Emma's bed, overwhelmed by the cosmic impossibility of the situation. "You're telling me that the woman I helped Tuesday is the granddaughter of the man who killed my father?" "I'm telling you," Amelia said, "that I'm the woman who's going to help you get justice for what was done to your family, if you'll let me." Emma, watching the adults with wide eyes, spoke into the charged silence. "Are you going to be friends?" Now, neither Wilson nor Amelia knew how to answer that question, but they both knew that their lives had just become irrevocably intertwined in ways neither had ever imagined possible. The children's hospital cafeteria at 2 in the morning was a surreal place for a conversation that would reshape 2 lives. Emma had finally fallen asleep after the nurses finished applying her bright pink cast, her choice of color because it matches my favorite backpack. Wilson and Amelia sat across from each other at a corner table, 2 cups of terrible vending machine coffee growing cold between them as Amelia spread documents across the laminated surface. Wilson stared at the papers with the expression of a man watching his world reorganize itself around an impossible truth. Bank records, internal Michelin communications, shipping manifests, legal correspondence, 23 years of meticulously planned corporate fraud laid out like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that formed a picture of his father's destruction. "This is the purchase order for the counterfeit tires that were planted at your father's shop," Amelia said, pointing to a document stamped with Michelin's internal routing codes. They were manufactured at a facility in Malaysia specifically for this operation. Same visual specifications as genuine Michelin tires, but with inferior rubber compounds and structural defects. Wilson picked up the paper with hands that trembled slightly. The order was dated 2 weeks before the lawyers had arrived at Wilds Automotive with their accusations and evidence. His father's signature appeared on the receiving documents, but Wilson knew Robert had never seen these particular tires. They'd been delivered during a week when Robert was visiting his sick sister in Memphis, leaving the shop in the hands of his longtime employee, Tommy Morrison. Tommy signed for these, Wilson said, his voice hollow. Dad was out of town. Tommy wouldn't have known to check the serial numbers against our authorized inventory. That was intentional, Amelia said gently. My grandfather's people researched. Your father's schedule waited for an opportunity when he wouldn't be present to verify the delivery personally. The next document was even more damning, an internal memo from Jean-Paul Ross to the head of Michelin's legal department, outlining the Nashville solution for dealing with problematic independent dealers who resist acquisition opportunities. Wilson. Read aloud. Robert Wild's reputation for integrity makes standard intimidation tactics ineffective. Recommend implementation of Protocol 7. Evidence implantation followed by immediate legal action. Suggest framing as trademark protection, rather than competitive elimination to minimize regulatory scrutiny. Protocol 7, Wilson repeated, his voice hard with barely controlled anger. They had a fucking protocol for destroying people's lives. Amelia flinched at the profanity, not from offense, but from recognition of the pain behind it. There are 43 other cases documented in these files. Tire dealers in 17 states, all destroyed using variations of the same methods. Total estimated value of acquired assets, $2.4 billion. How many people died from those defective tires? Wilson asked, Amelia's throat constricted. The internal safety reports identify 67 confirmed fatalities directly attributable to counterfeit tire failures. The actual number is probably higher because many accident investigations didn't identify tire failure as the primary cause. Wilson closed his eyes, his hands clenched into fists on the table. 67 people, including a family of 4. In Oregon, whose car rolled over when their front tire disintegrated on I-84, the parents and 2 kids, ages 6 and 9. Amelia's voice was barely above a whisper. My grandfather has their names in a file labeled Acceptable Risk Assessment. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of corporate evil reduced to statistical analysis. Wilson opened his eyes and looked at Amelia with an expression. She couldn't read part grief, part rage, part something else that might have been pity. How long have you known? He asked. 6 months. I discovered the files by accident while working on a new tire line that was supposed to improve safety standards. Amelia laughed bitterly. The irony wasn't lost on me. And you've been hiding. Ever since? Running, more accurately. My grandfather made it clear that I was either complicit or I was a threat to be eliminated. He has people looking for me, corporate security, private investigators, probably some less official resources. Wilson leaned back in his chair, studying her face. You could have walked away, destroyed the evidence, kept your inheritance, lived happily ever after in ignorant luxury. Why didn't you? Because I met your father once, Amelia said quietly. Wilson's eyebrows shot up. What? I was 12 years old, visiting tire plants with my grandfather during summer vacation. We stopped at Wilds Automotive as part of a tour of exemplary retail partners. Amelia's fingers traced the edge of one of the documents. Your father spent 20 minutes explaining to a 12-year-old girl how tire treads work, why proper inflation matters, how to check for wear patterns. He drew diagrams on the back of an envelope and gave me a Wilds Automotive keychain that I kept for years. Wilson's throat worked as he swallowed hard. He loved teaching people about cars. He was so kind, so passionate about his work. I remember thinking that he was the kind of person who made the world better just by existing. Amelia met Wilson's eyes. 3 months later, I heard my grandfather and his lawyers discussing the wild problem over dinner at our house. I was supposed to be upstairs doing homework, but I sat on the stairs and listened to them plan your father's destruction like it was a business acquisition. You were 12, Wilson said. You couldn't have stopped it. No, but I could have. Spoken up. I could have asked questions, made them explain why they were targeting such a good man. Instead, I pretended I didn't understand what I'd heard. Amelia's voice cracked. I've been complicit my entire life, Wilson. Every luxury I enjoyed, every opportunity I received, it was all built on blood money. Wilson stared at her for a long moment, then gathered the documents into a neat stack. What's your plan? I want to expose everything. Every case, every victim, every dollar stolen through fraud. I want federal prosecutors to file criminal charges. I want civil suits to bankrupt Michelin Corporation. And I want every family that was destroyed to receive justice. That's a nice sentiment, Wilson said. But you said yourself that your grandfather has connections everywhere. How do you plan to overcome that? Amelia pulled out her phone and showed Wilson a contact list. That made his eyes widen. 6 months of careful research. Federal prosecutors in 3 districts who can't be bought. Investigative journalists at major publications who've been waiting for a story like this. Securities and Exchange Commission investigators who've been building cases against corporate fraud. Consumer protection advocates who've been tracking Michelin's predatory practices for years. And they'll protect you from your grandfather's retaliation? Probably not, Amelia admitted. But once the story breaks publicly, killing me would only confirm everything and make the scandal worse. My grandfather's best strategy will be to distance himself from me, claim I'm mentally unstable or seeking revenge for some imagined slight. Wilson nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Your story. Your father's story. Documentation of what happened to your family, how the fraud affected your lives, what you've lost because of Michelin's actions. Amelia hesitated. And I need you to trust me enough to let me make this right. Trust, Wilson repeated. That's a big ask, considering your family's track record. I know. But Wilson, you helped me Tuesday without knowing anything about me except that I needed help. You sacrificed your job interview for a complete stranger. That tells me something about your character. What's that? That you understand the difference between justice and revenge. That you want to prevent other families from suffering what yours did, not just punish the people who hurt you. Wilson was quiet for several minutes, staring out the cafeteria windows at the sleeping city beyond. Finally, he spoke without looking at her. My father used to say that every person gets chances to choose between what's easy and what's right. Most people choose easy because right is expensive. And you? I learned from the best teacher in the world that right is the only choice worth making, even when it costs you everything. Wilson turned to face Amelia. So yes, I'll help you expose the truth, but I have conditions. Name them. First, Emma's safety is non-negotiable. If your grandfather threatens her in any way, I disappear with her and you never see us again. Agreed. What else? Second, when this is over and Michelin Corporation is destroyed, you use whatever money you have left to create a fund for independent tire dealers. Help people start businesses, provide low-interest loans, support families who want to build something honest. Amelia nodded. That's actually a beautiful idea. What's the third condition? Wilson smiled for the first time since learning her identity, and it transformed his entire face. You let me take you to dinner somewhere that serves real food, not hospital cafeteria garbage. If we're going to be partners in bringing down a criminal empire, we should probably get to know each other properly. Just to be clear, Amelia said, matching his smile, are you asking the Michelin Heiress on a date? I'm asking the woman who's brave enough to sacrifice everything for justice on a date, Wilson corrected. The Michelin thing is just complicated backstory. Amelia laughed, the first genuine laughter she'd experienced in months. Wilson Wilde, you are either the most forgiving man alive or completely insane. Probably both, Wilson admitted. But my daughter already likes you, and Emma has excellent judgment in people. They shook hands across the table, surrounded by evidence of corporate evil and sustained by the fragile hope that truth might finally triumph over power. Neither of them could predict the battles ahead, but they both knew they were no longer fighting alone. Outside, Nashville slept peacefully, unaware that two unlikely allies had just formed a partnership that would shake the automotive industry to its foundations. The revolution would begin with a flat tire and a kind stranger's choice to help. Sometimes, the smallest moments change everything. 2 weeks after their hospital meeting, Amelia's carefully constructed world collapsed overnight. She'd been living in her downtown apartment under the Amy Richardson identity, slowly building relationships with federal prosecutors and investigative journalists. When Jean-Paul's security team finally tracked her down, the warning came from an unexpected source, her former assistant at Michelin, Rebecca Martinez, who called at 3 a.m. with a voice tight with fear. "Miss Ross, they know where you are," Rebecca whispered into the phone. "Mr. Ross has had private investigators monitoring financial transactions. They traced the hospital payment you made for the Wilde family." Amelia's blood turned to ice. "How much time do I have?" "Maybe hours. They're planning to have you involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation. Your grandfather has doctors who will testify that you're suffering from a psychotic break, delusional thinking, paranoid schizophrenia. Once you're institutionalized, the evidence you've gathered becomes inadmissible testimony from a mentally incompetent person. Rebecca, you have to get out of there. If they know you warned me, I'm already gone. Took a leave of absence yesterday. Told them it was a family emergency." Rebecca's voice cracked. "Miss Ross, there's something else. Your grandfather isn't just planning to discredit you. He's going after the Wilde family directly." Amelia's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "The apartment where Wilson and Emma live, it's owned by a subsidiary of a company that Michelin acquired last year. Your grandfather found out about your relationship with Wilson. He's planning to evict them, and he's got connections at social services who will question Wilson's fitness as a parent once he's homeless. They'll take Emma away," Amelia breathed. "Unless Wilson can prove stable housing and income within 72 hours, Mr. Ross has also made sure that Wilson won't be able to find employment anywhere in the automotive industry. Every major shop in Tennessee has received warnings about hiring him." Amelia closed her eyes, the full scope of her grandfather's vindictiveness washing over her. He wasn't content to destroy her. He was going to punish everyone who'd tried to help her, including an innocent 8-year-old who'd done nothing except exist in proximity to the truth. "I have to warn them," Amelia said. "Miss Ross, if you contact the Wilde family directly, you'll lead them right to Wilson and Emma. Your phone is probably being monitored. Your car has a tracker. The moment you try to help them, you'll make their situation worse." Amelia disconnected the call and threw her phone against the wall, watching it shatter into pieces. She had perhaps 2 hours before Jean-Paul's people arrived to drag her away to some private psychiatric facility where she could be held indefinitely without legal recourse. The evidence that could destroy Michelin Corporation documents that represented justice for hundreds of families was hidden in safety deposit boxes that only she could access. If she disappeared, those files would remain buried forever, and her grandfather's crimes would never be exposed. But Wilson and Emma were in immediate danger because of her actions, and she was the only person who could save them. Amelia made a decision that went against every survival instinct she possessed. She called Wilson from the landline in her apartment lobby. praying that Jean Paul's surveillance hadn't extended to monitoring the building's main phone system yet. Wilson answered. On the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Hello, Wilson, it's Amelia. Don't say my name out loud." "Are you alone?" "Emma's asleep in the next room. What's wrong?" "Everything. My grandfather found us. He's coming for me, and he's going to destroy you and Emma to punish me for betraying the family." Amelia spoke quickly, knowing she had limited time. "You have 72 hours before social services questions your fitness as a parent. Your landlord is going to evict you, and every automotive shop in Tennessee has been warned not to hire you." Wilson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "What does he want?" "Me, and the evidence. If I disappear, and the documents are destroyed, he'll leave you alone. You and Emma can go back to your lives." "Bullshit," Wilson said flatly. "Men like your grandfather don't leave loose ends. Even if you surrender, we'll never be safe. He'll always see us as threats." "Then what do you suggest?" Amelia asked, though she was afraid of his answer. "We go public immediately. Tonight. Release everything to every journalist and prosecutor you've contacted. Upload the documents to every media outlet and social platform simultaneously. Create such a massive scandal that trying to silence us would only make things worse. Wilson, if we do that, there's no going back. My grandfather will use every resource he has to destroy us. You and Emma could end up in witness protection for years, assuming federal prosecutors can even keep you safe. And if we don't do it, Emma grows up knowing her father was too much of a coward to fight for what's right. That he let innocent people suffer because he was afraid of powerful men." Amelia heard something in Wilson's voice that made her chest tight. The same quiet determination he'd shown when he stopped to help her change a tire in the rain. This man had already lost everything once because of her family's crimes. Now, he was willing to risk everything again to make sure no other family suffered the same fate. "I can't ask you to do this," Amelia said. "The evidence I have is enough to send my grandfather to prison and bankrupt Michelin Corporation, but the process could take years. You and Emma would be targets the entire time." "You're not asking," Wilson said gently. "I'm offering. Because my father spent 23 years building something good, and your grandfather destroyed it for profit. Because 67 people are dead, and their families deserve justice. Because Emma deserves to grow up in a world where corporations can't murder people and get away with it." "This could cost you everything," Amelia warned. "I've already lost everything that mattered except Emma, and she's not safe anyway as long as your grandfather sees us as threats. At least this way, we're fighting back instead of just running." Amelia felt tears streaming down her face. "Wilson, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. If I hadn't involved you—" "Stop," Wilson interrupted firmly. "You didn't choose to be born into a criminal family any more than I chose to be born into a family that got targeted by criminals. What matters is what we do now that we know the truth. What about Emma? She's just a little girl. Emma's tougher than you think, and she already knows her daddy fights for people who can't fight for themselves. She understand." Wilson paused. "Besides, wouldn't you rather have her grow up knowing that when good people found out about something evil, they had the courage to stop it?" Amelia closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. "If we do this, we do it right. Complete exposure, every document, every victim's story. We make sure the truth is so widespread that it can't be covered up or explained away." "Agreed. What do you need from me?" "I need you to trust me with the most important thing in your life," Amelia said quietly. "I need you to bring Emma and meet me at the federal building downtown. We're going to walk into the U.S. Attorney's office together and hand over everything we have." "Why together?" "Because your grandfather's security team is probably watching the building. If I show up alone, they'll intercept me before I can reach the prosecutors. But if we arrive together, if you're publicly identified as a key witness. They can't make me disappear without also eliminating you. It forces them to deal with the scandal instead of trying to prevent it. Wilson was quiet for a moment. You're using me and Emma as human shields. Yes, Amelia admitted. I'm asking you to put your daughter in danger to protect me and expose my family's crimes. It's probably the most selfish thing anyone has ever asked of you. No, Wilson said. Thoughtfully, the most selfish thing would be letting your grandfather continue destroying families because I was too afraid to take a risk. We'll meet you there in 1 hour, Wilson, 1 hour, Amelia. And bring everything. Every document, every piece of evidence, every name of every victim. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. After Wilson hung up, Amelia sat in the lobby of her apartment building and tried to process what she'd just asked of him. She was requesting that a single father put his 8-year-old daughter in mortal danger to help expose her grandfather's crimes. It was unconscionable, selfish, and probably the only way to save innocent lives. But Wilson had said yes without hesitation, because he understood something that had taken Amelia months to learn. Sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to risk everything for justice. In less than 2 hours, they would walk into the federal building and change their lives forever. Jean-Paul Ross and Michelin Corporation would learn that some people couldn't be bought, intimidated, or silenced. The tire empire built on blood and lies was about to face its reckoning, delivered by the son of one of its victims and the granddaughter who'd chosen conscience over comfort. Amelia gathered her purse and the emergency bag she'd kept packed for months, then walked out into the Nashville night to meet the man who'd already sacrificed everything to help her once. This time, she was going to make sure his sacrifice meant something. The Federal Building in downtown Nashville at 4 a.m. was a fortress of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the pre-dawn darkness like a monument to government authority. Wilson parked his pickup truck in the visitor lot, Emma sleeping peacefully in the passenger seat despite the gravity of what was about to unfold. Amelia waited for them near the main entrance, clutching a large briefcase and looking like she hadn't slept in days. She'd changed from her usual disguise clothing into a navy business suit that emphasized her resemblance to the corporate executive she'd once been. If they were going to face federal prosecutors, she wanted to look like someone whose testimony could topple an empire. Is she okay? Amelia asked quietly as Wilson gently woke Emma. She's stronger than she looks, Wilson said, though his voice betrayed his own anxiety about involving his daughter in something so dangerous. Emma, remember what we talked about? Emma rubbed her eyes and looked around at the imposing government building with remarkable composure for an 8-year-old. We're going to help the police catch the bad people who hurt Grandpa Robert, she said matter-of-factly. That's right, sweetheart. And Miss Amelia is going to help us. Emma studied Amelia with the frank assessment of a child who'd learned to read adult emotions for survival. Are you scared? Terrified, Amelia admitted. But sometimes you have to do scary things to protect people. Like when Daddy helped you with your tire even though he might lose his job? Amelia felt her throat constrict. Exactly like that. The night security guard, an elderly man named Patterson who'd been working federal buildings for 30 years, looked skeptical when they requested access to the U.S. Attorney's office at such an unusual hour. But when Amelia explained that they had evidence of a major corporate conspiracy and were seeking immediate protective custody, his demeanor changed completely. Ma'am, you're talking about matters way above my pay grade, Patterson said. I can call the duty prosecutor, but it's going to take at least an hour for someone with authority to get here. We'll wait, Wilson said firmly. We're not leaving until someone in charge hears what we have to say. Patterson made the call, and within 45 minutes, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chun arrived with 2 FBI agents and expressions that suggested this had better be worth their interrupted sleep. Chun was a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for prosecuting white-collar crime that had earned her respect throughout the Justice Department. They convened in a conference room on the 15th floor, Emma curled up in a chair beside Wilson while Amelia spread documents across the table like evidence in a war crimes trial. The federal prosecutor's skepticism evaporated quickly as they reviewed internal Michelin communications, financial records, and safety reports that painted a picture of systematic corporate fraud spanning decades. "Jesus Christ," muttered FBI Agent Rodriguez as he read through the casualty reports. 67 confirmed deaths from defective tires that your grandfather knew were dangerous. "That's just what's documented in internal reports," Amelia said. "The actual number is probably much higher because most accident investigations didn't identify tire failure as the primary cause." Agent Chun studied a memo from Jean-Paul Ross to his legal team discussing acceptable risk thresholds for counterfeit tire operations. "This is smoking gun evidence of federal conspiracy charges. RICO violations, mail fraud, securities fraud, criminally negligent homicide. We're talking about potential life sentences here. If you can protect us long enough to testify," Wilson said. "Amelia's grandfather has resources that go well beyond normal corporate influence. He's already threatened to have her committed to a psychiatric facility and to destroy my family through social services." Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. "Mr. Wild, can you walk us through exactly what happened to your father's business? We need every detail, every document, every witness who might corroborate the fraud." Wilson spent the next hour recounting his father's destruction, his voice steady but his hands clenched as he described watching Robert Wild's spirit break under the weight of false accusations. Emma listened silently, occasionally reaching over to touch her father's arm when his emotions threatened to overwhelm him. "The counterfeit tires were delivered during the 1 week my father was out of town," Wilson explained. "His employee Tommy Morrison signed for them, but Tommy died in a construction accident 2 years ago. Very convenient timing for Michelin." Agent Chun and Rodriguez exchanged glances. "You think Morrison's death wasn't accidental?" "I think my grandfather doesn't. Leave loose ends," Amelia said quietly. "Tommy Morrison knew he'd signed for those specific tires. If he'd ever been questioned under oath about the delivery, he might have remembered details that contradicted Michelin's narrative. We'll need to reopen the investigation into Morrison's death," Rodriguez said, making notes. "What other witnesses might have information about the fraudulent tire deliveries?" Wilson thought for a moment. "Jake Turner, who owns Jake's Auto Repair. He was friends with my father, knows the industry well enough to spot inconsistencies in Michelin's story. Sarah Kim at First National Bank, who handled my father's business accounts and saw the financial irregularities that appeared right before the lawyers showed up. Anyone at Michelin who might be willing to testify against Jean-Paul Ross." Amelia hesitated. "Rebecca Martinez, my former assistant. She's the one who warned me that my grandfather was closing in. She has access to executive communications and has seen enough to know the corruption goes to the very top of the company." Agent Chun looked up from her notes. "Miss Ross, I have to ask you directly, what made you decide to expose your own family? You stood to inherit billions of dollars and control of one of the world's largest corporations." Amelia was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on Emma, who was now sleeping peacefully despite the adult conversation swirling around her. "I met Wilson's father when I was 12 years old. He was the kindest man I'd ever encountered outside my immediate family. 3 months later, I overheard my grandfather planning his destruction like it was a routine business transaction." She turned to face Agent Chun directly. "I've spent 16 years living off blood money, telling myself I didn't know how deep the corruption went. But the truth is, I chose not to know. I chose comfortable ignorance over moral responsibility. And what changed? I realized that every day I stayed silent, more families like Wilson's were being destroyed. More people were dying from defective tires that my company knowingly produced and distributed. I couldn't live with that knowledge anymore. Agent Rodriguez had been studying financial documents during this exchange. Miss Ross, according to these records, Michelin Corporation has over $4 billion in cash reserves and overseas assets. Even if we file criminal charges and civil suits, Jean-Paul Ross could potentially flee the country and live comfortably for the rest of his life. Not if we seize the assets before he knows charges are being filed, Amelia said. I have access codes to most of the overseas accounts. My grandfather gave them to me as part of my executive training, never imagining I'd use them against him. Agent Chun and Rodriguez stared at her. You're talking about helping federal authorities freeze billions of dollars in corporate assets based on your insider knowledge. I'm talking about making sure that when Michelin Corporation is dismantled, the money goes to victim compensation instead of financing my grandfather's escape to a non-extradition country. Wilson looked at Amelia with an expression of profound respect. You're willing to give up everything, your inheritance, your family, your entire identity, to make this right? I already gave up everything when I chose to run instead of staying silent, Amelia said. This just makes the sacrifice meaningful. Agent Chun leaned back in her chair, clearly overwhelmed by the scope of the case they were being handed. Assuming we can verify everything in these documents, we're looking at one of the largest corporate fraud prosecutions in U.S. history. The investigation alone will take months, possibly years. How long can you keep us safe? Wilson asked. Witness. Protection can provide security indefinitely, but it means new identities, relocation, complete separation from your current lives. For you and Emma, that might mean never returning to Nashville, never using your real names again. Wilson looked down at his sleeping daughter, his face etched with the weight of an impossible choice. And if we don't enter protection? Protection? Jean-Paul Ross has already demonstrated willingness to destroy anyone who threatens him, Rodriguez said bluntly. Based on what Miss Ross has told us about his resources and connections, I wouldn't recommend taking any chances with your safety. Emma stirred in her chair and opened her eyes, looking around at the serious adult faces surrounding her. Daddy, are we going to have to move away? Wilson's voice was gentle but honest. Maybe, sweetheart. It depends on what happens next. Will I still be Emma? You'll always be Emma to me, Wilson said, brushing hair from her face. No matter what name we have to use, you'll always be my daughter, and I'll always love you. Emma considered this with 8-year-old logic. If we help catch the bad people, will other kids be safe? Yes, Amelia said softly. Other kids like. You won't have to worry about their daddies losing their jobs because of lies. Emma nodded solemnly. Then we should do it. Grandpa Robert would want us to protect other families. Agent Chun looked at Wilson with something approaching admiration. Mr. Wilde, you've raised a remarkable young woman. She gets that from her mother, Wilson said quietly. As dawn broke over Nashville, casting golden light through the conference room windows. 4 adults and 1 8-year-old child made a decision that would reshape the automotive industry and deliver justice to hundreds of families who'd been waiting decades for someone to care about the truth. The Michelin empire built on blood and lies was about to face its reckoning, brought down by the courage of a man who'd lost everything and a woman who'd chosen to give up everything. Sometimes the smallest acts of conscience changed the world. By 7 a.m., the conference room had transformed into a war room. FBI Agent Rodriguez had called in 3 additional agents specializing in corporate fraud, while Assistant U.S. Attorney Chen had contacted federal prosecutors in 4 other districts where Michelin's fraudulent operations had targeted victims. Emma sat at a corner table with coloring books that Agent Martinez had retrieved from the building's family services office. carefully creating a picture of a rainbow while the adults planned the systematic dismantling of a corporate empire around her. Wilson watched his daughter color with remarkable composure despite the chaos, marveling at her resilience. Emma had already survived the loss of her mother, poverty, and now the revelation that powerful people wanted to hurt their family. Yet she remained focused on simple acts of creation and hope. "Mr. Wilde," Agent Chun said, pulling Wilson's attention. "Back to the tactical discussion. We've verified 3 of the cases Miss Ross documented through independent sources. Michelin's pattern of targeting successful independent dealers is confirmed. We're ready to move forward with protective custody and the beginning of formal proceedings." "What exactly does that mean for me and Emma?" Wilson asked. Agent Rodriguez consulted his notes. "Immediate relocation to a safe house facility outside Tennessee. New identities within 48 hours. Educational arrangements for Emma through federal programs. Complete financial support until the case concludes and you can establish new lives." "And how long will that take? Conservative estimate?" 18 to 24 months for the criminal case to reach trial. Civil proceedings could extend another 2 to 3 years beyond that. Wilson felt the weight of that timeline settling on his shoulders. 3 to 5 years of Emma's childhood spent in hiding, using false names, separated from everything familiar and comfortable. "Agent Chun," Wilson said carefully, "I appreciate the protection you're offering, but I need guarantees about Emma's welfare that go beyond physical safety." "What kind of guarantees?" "I want Emma to maintain contact with her support system here in Nashville. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, has been like a grandmother to her since my wife died. Dr. Sarah Kim at the Children's Hospital has been monitoring Emma's emotional recovery from her mother's death. These relationships are crucial to her psychological health." Agent Rodriguez frowned. "Mr. Wilde, maintaining contact with people from your previous life creates security risks that could compromise the entire operation. Then find a way to manage those risks without destroying my daughter's emotional stability," Wilson said firmly. "I won't sacrifice Emma's mental health for the sake of investigative convenience." Amelia looked up from the financial documents she'd been reviewing with Agent Martinez. "What if we restructure the entire approach?" "How do you mean?" Agent Chun asked. "Instead of hiding Wilson and Emma, what if we make them publicly visible witnesses from the beginning? Hold a press conference today, make their story the centerpiece of the investigation. If Jean-Paul tries to harm them after they've testified publicly, it only confirms everything we're alleging about his willingness to eliminate threats." Agent Rodriguez shook his head. "That puts them in maximum danger." "They're already in maximum danger," Amelia pointed out. "My grandfather doesn't forgive or forget. Even if Wilson and Emma disappear into witness protection, he'll spend years looking for them. This way, they control the narrative instead of reacting to threats." Wilson considered the proposal. What would that look like practically? "Full media exposure," Agent Chun said slowly, warming to the idea. "Press conference with major outlets, exclusive interviews with investigative journalists, congressional testimony. You become the public face of Michelin's victims. And Emma? Protected by the fact that harming the daughter of a prominent whistleblower would create a scandal that would destroy my grandfather's remaining credibility," Amelia said. "He survives by operating in shadows. Public attention is his greatest weakness." Emma looked up from her coloring. "Would I be on television?" Wilson knelt beside her chair. "Maybe, sweetheart." "Would that scare you?" Emma considered this seriously. "Would I get to tell people about Grandpa Robert and how good he was? If you wanted to, yes. Then I'm not scared. People should know that Grandpa Robert was a good man and the bad people lied about him." Agent Chun and Rodriguez exchanged glances. "An 8-year-old testifying about corporate fraud creates legal complications," Rodriguez said. "I'm not suggesting Emma testify in court," Wilson clarified. But if she wants to honor her grandfather's memory publicly, that's her choice too. Mr. Wilde, Agent Chun said, if we proceed with public exposure instead of witness protection, we need absolute cooperation from both you and Miss Ross. Complete transparency about every aspect of your interactions with Michelin Corporation. Access to all documents and communications, willingness to testify before Congress and grand juries. You have that, Wilson said without hesitation. Miss Ross, Agent Chun continued, your cooperation means providing access to Michelin's overseas financial accounts, testifying against your own grandfather, and potentially spending years in legal proceedings that will destroy your family relationships permanently. Amelia met the prosecutor's eyes steadily. Agent Chun, I stopped having family relationships the moment I learned my grandfather was a murderer who built his fortune on innocent people's blood. Whatever happens to me personally is irrelevant compared to getting justice for his victims. There's one more condition, Wilson said, his voice taking on the tone of a man who'd thought carefully about what he needed. When this is over, when Michelin Corporation is dismantled and the criminal cases are concluded, I want to establish a foundation using whatever assets are recovered through civil suits. What kind of foundation? Agent Rodriguez asked. The Robert Wilde Memorial Foundation for Independent Automotive Dealers, providing low-interest loans, business mentorship, and legal protection for family-owned tire and automotive shops, helping people build honest businesses without fear of corporate retaliation. Wilson's voice strengthened as he outlined his vision. Every family that Michelin destroyed deserves a chance to rebuild. Every honest mechanic who wants to serve their community should have access to resources and support. We turn my father's destruction into a legacy that helps hundreds of other families achieve what he was never allowed to complete. Agent Chun nodded approvingly. That's actually brilliant from a public relations standpoint. Shows that this case is about justice and community building, not just punishment. And I want Amelia to run it, Wilson added, causing every head in the room to turn toward him in surprise. Wilson, Amelia protested, I can't take a leadership role in something like that. I'm Jean-Paul Ross's granddaughter. My presence would taint everything you're trying to build. No, Wilson said firmly. Your presence would prove that redemption is possible, that people can choose to right the wrongs committed by their families. You understand the tire industry better than anyone. You have connections with honest dealers who survived Michelin's attacks, and you've already sacrificed everything to expose the truth. Emma looked up from her coloring again. Miss Amelia should help other daddies who lost their jobs because of bad people. That's what Mommy would have wanted. Amelia felt tears streaming down her face. Emma, sweetheart, are you sure? Your daddy is asking me to be part of your family's legacy. That's a very big responsibility. Emma stood up from her chair and walked over to where Amelia sat, studying her with the frank assessment that only children can provide. You helped me when my arm was hurt, and you're helping Daddy catch the bad people who hurt Grandpa Robert. That makes you family. Wilson smiled at his daughter's logic. Emma's right. Family isn't just about blood relations. It's about people who choose to protect and support each other. Agent Chun looked around the room at the assembled group federal prosecutors, FBI, agents, a single father, his 8-year-old daughter, and the heiress who'd given up billions to expose her grandfather's crimes. So we're agreed, Chun said. Public exposure starting with a press conference this afternoon. Full cooperation with federal investigations. Civil suits to recover assets for victim compensation. And the eventual establishment of a foundation to support independent automotive dealers. One more thing, Wilson said. I want Jake Turner involved as an advisor to the foundation. He knew my father, understands the industry, and has connections with honest shop owners across the South. Done. Agent Chun agreed. Anything else? Wilson looked at Amelia, then at Emma, who had returned to her coloring but was clearly listening to every word. "I want my daughter to grow up in a world where telling the truth matters more than protecting powerful people," Wilson said quietly. "Where corporations can't murder innocent families and face no consequences. Where a mechanic's reputation is worth more than a CEO's stock options. That's what we're fighting for," Agent Chun assured him. Emma held up her coloring page, a rainbow stretching between two houses, with stick figures holding hands underneath. "This is our new family," she announced. "Daddy and me and Miss Amelia and all the people we're going to help." As the adults prepared for the press conference that would expose Jean-Paul Ross's crimes to the world, Emma's simple drawing served as a reminder of what they were really fighting for: the possibility that kindness could triumph over cruelty, that truth could overcome power, and that even the most unlikely families could find each other and create something beautiful together. The Michelin empire was about to fall, brought down by a mechanic's integrity, an heiress's conscience, and an 8-year-old's unwavering belief that good people should protect each other. Sometimes, the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m., giving Wilson just enough time to return to their apartment and gather essential belongings before their lives changed forever. As he packed Emma's clothes and favorite books, his hands trembled with the weight of what they were about to do. Emma sat on her bed, carefully placing her most treasured possessions in a small backpack, the worn stuffed elephant her mother had given her, a photo of the three of them from happier times, and a small wooden jewelry box that had belonged to Sarah. "Daddy," Emma said quietly, "can we bring Mommy's box from the closet?" Wilson's throat tightened. Sarah's memory box had been untouched since her death, sitting on the top shelf of their bedroom closet like a shrine he couldn't bear to disturb. "Sweetheart, we need to pack light. Maybe we should leave it here where it's safe. But what if the bad people come to our house? What if they take Mommy's things?" The thought of Jean-Paul's security team ransacking their apartment and destroying Sarah's belongings made Wilson's chest constrict with protective fury. "You're right. Let's get the box." Wilson retrieved the wooden chest from the closet, his hands shaking as he held the last tangible connection to his wife. Sarah had started the memory box during her pregnancy, filling it with ultrasound photos, baby clothes, and handwritten letters to their unborn daughter. As Wilson set the box on the bed, the lid shifted slightly, revealing the corner of an envelope he'd never seen before. His heart stopped as he recognized Sarah's handwriting on cream-colored paper. "For Wilson and Emma, to be opened when you need to remember who you are." "Daddy, what's that?" Emma asked, noticing the letter. Wilson's hands trembled as he opened the envelope, finding 3 pages of Sarah's distinctive handwriting dated just 2 weeks before her death. The letter began, "My darling husband and precious daughter, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're facing something difficult alone." Emma climbed onto the bed beside Wilson as he read aloud, his voice cracking with emotion. "Wilson, I know you blame yourself for things beyond your control. You blamed yourself for your father's troubles, for not being able to save his business or his reputation. But I need you to understand something. Your father's greatest pride wasn't his garage or his success. It was raising a son who would sacrifice his own opportunities to help strangers in need. The day you told me about helping that elderly woman change her tire instead of going to your job interview, I fell in love with you all over again. Not because you were foolish or impractical, but because you proved that Robert Wilde had raised a man who understood that character matters more than comfort. Emma, my beautiful girl, your daddy is the kind of man who will always choose doing right over doing easy. Sometimes that will cost our family money or opportunities, but it will never cost us our souls. When you're old enough to understand, I want you to know that having a father with uncompromising integrity is worth more than all the security or wealth in the world." Wilson, I know you're reading this during a time when you're tempted to compromise your values for our family's sake. Don't. The world needs men like you and your father. Men who can't be bought or intimidated. who keep their promises even when it hurts. If someone asks you to choose between what's safe and what's right, remember that you're Robert Wilde's son and Emma's father. Choose right, my love. Choose right, and know that I'll be proud of you wherever I am." Wilson's tears dropped onto the letter as he read the final paragraph. "Emma, take care of your daddy. Remind him that heroes aren't people who never feel afraid. Heroes are people who feel afraid and do the right thing anyway. Your grandpa Robert was a hero, your daddy is a hero. And someday you'll be a hero too, because you'll remember where you come from and who raised you to be brave." Emma wrapped her small arms around Wilson's waist as they both cried, holding each other and Sarah's words like a lifeline in the storm they were about to face. "Mommy knew," Emma whispered against Wilson's chest. "She knew we'd have to be brave." Wilson folded the letter carefully and placed it in his wallet, next to the photo of Sarah and Emma that he carried everywhere. She always knew us better than we knew ourselves. As they finished packing, Wilson felt something shift inside him, a quiet certainty that Sarah would have been proud of their choice to fight Jean-Paul Ross, regardless of the cost. She'd married a man who chose conscience over comfort, and she'd expected him to keep choosing conscience even after she was gone. Emma picked up her stuffed elephant and looked around their small apartment one last time. "Are you scared, Daddy?" "Terrified," Wilson admitted. "But your mommy was right, being scared doesn't mean we can't be brave." "Miss Amelia is brave too," Emma said thoughtfully. "She's giving up everything to help us and other families." Wilson smiled through his tears. "Yes, she is. I think your mommy would have liked Miss Amelia very much." As they walked toward the door, carrying their few possessions and Sarah's blessing, Wilson felt his father's presence and his wife's love surrounding them like invisible armor. They were about to face the most powerful man in the tire industry, backed by nothing but truth and the knowledge that some things are worth any sacrifice. The press conference would begin in 3 hours. By evening, their story would be international news, and Jean-Paul Ross would know that his victims had finally found their voices. Sarah had been right. Heroes are people who feel afraid and do the right thing anyway. Today, Wilson and Emma Wilde were going to be heroes. 2 years later, Wilson stood in the lobby of the Robert Wilde Memorial Foundation headquarters, watching Emma help a newly widowed mechanic's daughter with her homework in the Children's Learning Center. The foundation occupied a converted automotive dealership in East Nashville, its garage bays now transformed into workshop spaces where experienced mechanics taught young people the skills Robert Wilde had once passed down to his son. The press conference that had started everything felt like a lifetime ago, though Wilson could still remember every detail with crystal clarity. The moment he and Emma had walked onto that stage with Amelia and federal prosecutors, their story had exploded across national media. Jean-Paul Ross had tried to control the narrative for exactly 6 hours before additional victims began coming forward by the dozens. The criminal trial had lasted 8 months. Jean-Paul Ross, at 73 years old, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and criminally negligent homicide. Michelin Corporation, stripped of its leadership and facing billions in civil judgments, had been broken up and sold to competitors who agreed to honor victim compensation settlements. Emma, now 10 years old and wise beyond her years, had testified before Congress about the importance of protecting families like hers from corporate retaliation. Her composed testimony, delivered while wearing a T-shirt that said, "Grandpa Robert's Legacy," had been viewed by millions and helped pass the Family Business Protection Act, legislation requiring federal review of any corporate acquisition involving suspected fraud. "Daddy, Mrs. Patterson wants to know if you can help Mr. Rodriguez install the lift in Bay 3. Emma called across the lobby, her voice carrying the same matter-of-fact confidence that had sustained them through 2 years of legal battles and media attention. Wilson smiled and nodded to Jake Turner, who was training 3 young mechanics in proper tire installation techniques. Jake had become the Foundation's Director of Technical Education, finally able to pass on decades of honest automotive knowledge without fear of corporate interference. Amelia emerged from her office, carrying a stack of loan approval documents, her face bearing the kind of peaceful satisfaction that Wilson had never seen during their first desperate months together. As the Foundation's executive director, she'd overseen the approval of over 200 small business loans to independent automotive dealers, helping families rebuild what corporations like her grandfather's had destroyed. The Springfield family's application came through, Amelia said, her voice bright with enthusiasm. 3 generations of mechanics who lost their shop to fraudulent competition. We can have them back in business within 6 weeks. That makes 53 shops reopened this year, Wilson said proudly. Your grandfather's billion-dollar fraud is becoming 53 families' second chances. Emma looked up from her homework assistance. Miss Amelia, did you tell Mr. Wilson about the letter from the Tire Safety Board? Amelia's smile widened. The new federal tire safety standards go into effect next month. Every tire manufacturer in the country now has to meet the quality specifications your grandfather developed before he died. His safety protocols are becoming industry law. Wilson felt the familiar warmth that came with knowing Robert Wild's dedication to protecting families was finally being honored on a national scale. The man who'd been destroyed for refusing to compromise on safety had become the posthumous architect of automotive safety reform. There's something else, Amelia said, her voice soft with emotion. Rebecca Martinez called this morning. The Automotive Workers Union voted to establish the Sarah Wild Memorial Scholarship for the daughters of mechanics. Full college tuition for young women pursuing careers in engineering or business. Emma's face lit up with pride. Mommy would love that other girls get to follow their dreams. As the afternoon sun streamed through the Foundation's windows, Wilson looked around at the bustling activity mechanics teaching, families learning, young people building futures that corporate fraud couldn't steal from them. Emma was thriving in a community that celebrated her parents' memories and her own remarkable resilience. The woman who'd been stranded with a flat tire on a rainy Nashville highway had become family in the truest sense, bound not by blood, but by shared values and mutual sacrifice. Amelia had found redemption by dedicating her life to repairing the damage her grandfather had caused, while Wilson had discovered that fighting for justice could heal grief in ways he'd never imagined possible. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table in the modest house they'd bought near the Foundation, Emma made an announcement that surprised neither of the adults who'd learned to expect wisdom from unexpected sources. When I grow up, I want to be an automotive engineer like Grandpa Robert, but I also want to help families like Miss Amelia does. Is that possible? Wilson and Amelia exchanged glances across the table, both thinking of Robert Wild's belief that promises to people mattered more than promises to metal, and Sarah's conviction that heroes are people who feel afraid, but do what's right anyway. Emma, Wilson said gently, I think that's exactly what the world needs. Outside, Nashville hummed with the quiet energy of families building honest lives, protected by laws that honor integrity over profit and sustained by the truth that one act of kindness can change everything. Sometimes the smallest moments save the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.